late 19th century, an anthropologist discovered something deep within the earth in the heart of the French countryside. Right away, a scandal ensued, a controversy that smolders to this very day. Because if what was found was authentic, it appends everything that scientists recognize about humanity's past. Were we always alone on this planet, or did we share it with something else? If so, what was that relationship like? When you take everything together, you're left with one startling possibility: that human beings weren't always the apex species, and to this day, we still may be much farther down the food chain than we would like to admit. You won't want to miss this one. In late 1890, a research expedition of anthropologists and archaeologists were in the middle of an exciting excavation. Their efforts were focused on a site near Castelnau in southern France. It was a Bronze Age cemetery, complete with numerous burial sites, including a tumulus, or earthen mound, that had been in use for thousands of years. In fact, one man suspected that the tumulus was older than the Bronze Age. He wondered if it was constructed as far back as the Neolithic period. That man was Georges Vacher de Lapouge, an anthropologist from the city of Vienne. One winter day, George was sifting through the sediment covering one of the cemetery's tumulus when he happened upon something remarkable. As carefully as he could, he started brushing away at something that looked like a human bone. This, in and of itself, wasn't all that remarkable. What was remarkable was the size of the bones. You see, by the time George finished dusting off all the dirt, he had found 3 specimens: a humerus, a tibia, and a femoral midshaft. You could see them here. For comparison, that's a bone from an average-sized man in the center. The difference in size speaks for itself. George seemed to immediately realize the importance of his discovery, and he measured each bone and recorded its dimensions, and wasted no time in authoring a paper describing the remains in great detail. Before the year was through, he had submitted his findings along with images of the bones to the French scientific journal La Nature. In it, George wrote this:
I think it is unnecessary to note that these bones are undeniably human, despite their enormous size. The volumes of the bones were more than double the normal pieces to which they correspond. Judging by the usual intervals of anatomical points, they also involve lengths almost double.
George's paper included specific measurements of each bone. The femur fragment was 5.5 inches long with a circumference of 6.3 inches. The tibia fragment was over 10 inches long and over 5 inches around. These are absolutely enormous measurements because, remember, they are only small, partial fragments of each bone. Clearly, if George was right, there could be only one thing that these bone fragments came from. He concluded his analysis by saying the subject would have been a likely size of 3.5 meters, or 11 feet 6 inches tall. He felt that these remains belonged to what must have been one of the largest human beings to have ever existed. That's right. The only conclusion that George could reach was that he had unearthed fragments from a literal, honest-to-God giant, buried in a stratum of sediment dating back to the late Stone Age. Someone making this claim in 2024 would understandably meet with a lot of criticism, but George found the scientific establishment much more open to his claims back then. And rather than hold on to the specimens, which became known as the Giant of Castelnau, George allowed others to examine the bones as well. They eventually wound up in the possession of researchers at France's University of Montpellier, where they were studied by a professor of zoology named Sabatier and a paleontology professor named Dulage. Well, these scholars shared them with another individual, a Dr. Paul-Louis André Quignet, who served as the professor of pathological anatomy. And Dr. Quignet was astonished. He had to admit the same thing, that the bones discovered in Castelnau represented the remains of a very tall race. He did, however, find some inconsistencies with their dimensions, but attributed this to what he believed was, in his words, the specimen's morbid growth. You see, part of the reason that these discoveries were met with an open mind was because researchers here in this region had discovered something similar. As a matter of fact, a discovery only 3 miles from Castelnau uncovered similar remains 4 years later. Workers were excavating a waterworks reservoir near another cemetery when they found what they believed were human skulls measuring 28, 31, and 32 inches in circumference. For comparison, the circumference of an average human skull is somewhere between 22 and 24 inches for men, 21 and 23 for women. In other words, these skeletons seem to have also come from a race of giants. These people were judged to stand between 10 and 15 feet in height. The skulls were supposedly sent to the Paris Academy for further examination. And that's that. We don't really know what happened to them. The same thing can be said for the bones of the giant of Castelnau. They disappeared without a trace, conveniently. All we have are George's original article and his grainy photograph. And you know what? It's the same story we've heard time and time again whenever gigantic human remains are discovered.
What's even crazier than these disturbing discoveries is how giants like these slept. I mean, with bodies so incredibly large, you have to wonder how they got a decent night of sleep. Well, as it so happens, Helix has this in mind when creating their special mattress line, Titan. Titan is the plus-size sleep solution built specifically for the big, tall, and strong, and giants too. Although, I don't think they offer options if you're 11 feet tall. Titan mattresses thoughtfully pair layers of high-quality, supportive foam with heavy-duty, premium coils. And this means you get that extra lift and durability you deserve, ensuring a good night's sleep for years to come. Titan has mastered the art of blending comfort and support, so you no longer have to choose between the two. Plus, they have a factory in Arizona and shipped conveniently to you for free anywhere in the US. Look, if you're tired of mattresses that just don't measure up to your needs, whether you're an ordinary human being or a freak of nature, it's time to upgrade to Titan. Now, I may not be a giant, but I'm a bigger guy. So when searching for a mattress, I wanted it to be suitable for a giant in mind. I mean, hey, if it can support the weight of a giant, surely I would be comfortable with it. I just got this mattress and after lying down, I love it. Not only does it cradle my pressure points, but it feels like they truly had giants in mind when designing this thing. Not to mention how easy it was to set up in our small room and just how high quality it feels. Even better is with your Titan mattress, you get a 120-night sleep trial along with a 10-year warranty, and TitanMattress.com delivers your mattress right to your door for free within the US. I'm not supposed to give away this coveted secret, but these guys had direct access to ancient bones of giant skeletons to perfect their mattress formula. You know, because they're in Arizona and whatnot. Oh wait, you mean I can't say that? What it really means is that they're able to use premium materials at a reasonable price for you with no middleman bringing up the cost. All of their mattresses are designed in Arizona by master craftsmen who have been building mattresses for over 25 years. Again, they got giant skeletons. They're in cahoots with the Smithsonians. Titan offers two different options, the Titan Plus and the Titan Plus Luxe. Choose the Luxe if you're looking for a more universally medium feel while still getting the same great support as the Titan Plus. This is also a great option for people who may have a partner who doesn't consider themselves plus size. Choosing the Titan Plus if you're looking for a firmer comfort level. Look, I love my Titan mattress, and I think you would too. if you're looking for a new bed, check out titanmattress.com. You can click on the links below and get 25% off your mattress with this code.
Here in the United States of America, dozens of reports from the late 19th and early 20th centuries describe the skeletons of giants being unearthed all across the country, only to be sent to the Smithsonian Institution where they are conveniently lost. The fact that the story always played out the same has led many people to one of two conclusions. Either an active conspiracy is afoot, or the stories are just hoaxes. Now, let me bring you up to date on the giant of Castelnau. You see, for well over a century, no one really bothered to re-examine the bones found in 1890 by George. It wasn't until recently that anyone bothered to conduct any follow-up research on the bone fragments. In 2022, Catherine Hacknian, a student at Eastern Michigan University specializing in osteology, or the study of bones, decided to get to the bottom of the giant of Castelnau once and for all. Using modern software to remeasure the bones as presented in George's image, she was able to conclude that their owner actually stood much shorter than originally estimated, somewhere between 6'5" and 6'7". This is still well above average, especially for Neolithic France, but far from the 11+ feet that George had claimed. Catherine was also puzzled by something else George had mentioned in his original article. She said that he had noted another unusual quality of the giant of Castelnau's bones. They were much denser than those of a human being. This led her to one possible explanation, that the giant of Castelnau was not a giant at all, but actually the remains of Ursus spulius, or cave bear. These ferocious animals were common in southern France until around 20,000 years ago. So, was it a hoax? Catherine said this:
I concluded that the bones Lapouge found were more than likely that of a cave bear and not a giant human. Whether Georges knew this or not, we may never know. We may also never know what happened to those remains, but by experimenting with new methodology, I was able to find some sort of closure for the giant, for now, at least.
One other thing before moving on, George may have indeed perpetrated a hoax, because you see, as it turns out, he had left a bad stain on anthropology. Today, he's regarded as someone who spread a lot of vicious, racist ideas about anthropology, situating races in a hierarchy and even endorsing eugenics. Because of this nasty past, which appears across a lot of alternative history, lots of folks jump to the conclusion that any discussion of ancient giants is inherently racist. And listen, sometimes it is. But two things can be true at the same time. Bad actors can misuse the idea of ancient giants to racist ends, and they definitely have. And simultaneously, there is also strong evidence that we don't know everything about our past. In fact, many representatives from indigenous cultures speak frankly about the existence of giants. A good example is Barbara Alice Mann, and Dr. Mann is a professor at the University of Toledo and is recognized as an Ohio Bear Clan Seneca. She has written extensively on the dark history of colonialism, imperialism, and Native American genocide, and she believes that abnormally large skeletons were found in ancient earthworks. In fact, in 2003, Dr. Mann wrote a publication at the specific behest of elders of the Native American community of Ohio. The book, entitled Native Americans, Archaeologists, and the Mounds, directly addresses the issue of giant skeletons found in indigenous North American mounds. Dr. Mann wrote this:
As the many skeletons pulled from their graves attest, the Ohio mound builders often reached extraordinary heights. Some measured 7 feet in length. The disarticulation of skeletons, or the bones falling apart from the joints as the soft tissue decays, adds only an inch or two to height, whereas archaeologists who were familiar with the concept of disarticulation continually expressed surprise over the gigantic size of the mound builders.
Clearly, even if the idea has been misused by bad people, there's something legitimate to the rumors of giants once roaming the earth. There are just too many stories. We know that many, if not most cultures, believed in the existence of larger than average human beings, but where are these giants now? In some cases, they might have died off. But in isolated pockets here and there, they may have survived longer than we thought. In 1527, the Spanish conquistador Panfilio de Narvaez was dispatched to colonize what is now modern-day Florida. The following year, his fleet ran around, and through a series of further mishaps, the expedition failed. Among those escaping all the chaos was a junior officer by the name of Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. You see, when things took a turn for the worse, Alvar and others tried to reach Mexico after spending a brief time in Florida. Well, the bad news was that Mexico was farther away than Alvar and the others thought. The good news was that he survived and crashed on the coast of Texas, where he eventually was able to make contact with other Spanish settlers. When he finally returned to his homeland, he had a wild story to share. Alvar eventually published a memoir of his time in the wilderness, but one of the more interesting tidbits is a journey where he and other survivors tried to cross a lake in Florida. He wrote this:
"When we attempted to cross the large lake, we came under heavy attack from many giant Indians concealed behind trees. Some of our men were wounded in this conflict, for which the good armor they wore did not avail. The Indians we had so far seen are all archers. They go naked, are large of body, and appear at a distance like giants. They are of admirable proportions, very spare and of great activity and strength. The bows they use are as thick as the arm, of 11 or 12 palms in length, which they discharge at 200 paces with so great precision that they miss nothing."
Other conquistadors like Hernando de Soto and Hernando de Alarcón also had run-ins with giants as well. In many descriptions, these fearsome opponents stood over 10 feet tall and attacked on sight. One exception describing more gentle giants comes from 1519. While mapping the entire Gulf Coast that year, explorer Alfonso Alvarez de Pineda supposedly encountered an entire village filled with a race of giants from 10 to 11 palms in height. Although other tribes along the Mississippi River feared them, Alonso said that these giants actually seemed quite peaceful. Another more recent example of a possible giant, although still taking place a long time ago, comes from the late 1800s in Connecticut. On Wednesday, June 19, 1898, the Naugatuck Daily News carried an article titled "The Cotton Hollow Wild Man," and what it described as simply unbelievable. According to the story, 4 men identified as George Howes, Howard Bradley, James Durbin, and Jerry Wilson were working together in an area between Naugatuck and High Rock Grove, known as Cotton Hollow, not to be confused with a Connecticut town of the same name. This Cotton Hollow is part of modern-day Naugatuck. Now, these fellows weren't just co-workers. They also grew up in the same hometown of Danbury, and this meant that they were also friends. And so whenever their day ended, they often continued spending time together. A week before the story ran, the 4 men were doing what they usually did, calling on friends in the High Rock Grove area. But as the night dragged on, they decided it was time to return back to where they were staying in Naugatuck. As a matter of fact, it was getting way too late, and they all had to be at work early the next day. So George, Howard, James, and Jerry set back on foot in the direction of Naugatuck. And this path took them straight through Cotton Hollow. Even though it was sometime between 11 and midnight, no one was really spooked or anything. These were 4 grown men. But all that changed in an instant. Without warning, the bushes up ahead of them shuddered. According to the witnesses, a gigantic shape stepped out into the moonlight. It looked far too large to be a man, but before anybody could react, the intruder demanded a question. How far is the next town? Now, at this point, Jerry was the one leading the pack, and he's absolutely frozen in place. He could feel his hair standing on end, and Jerry was sure that his eyes must have bulged out of his sockets, but he finally mustered a response, 3 miles. And the moment Jerry spoke, the enormous shape took off without uttering another word. It simply disappeared in a flash, bolting from the bushes and heading off into the forest. The newspaper said this:
All 4 of the men had seen him. However, before he was out of sight and they were satisfied that he was at least twice as tall as anyone of their party and correspondingly as large every other way, they acknowledged to having been pretty thoroughly scared by his sudden appearance.
Well, George, Howard, James, and Jerry quickly made their way back home that night. When they got a chance to examine the location of their sighting the next day, they looked for any sign that the strange visitor might have left behind. The Naugatuck Daily News said that the workers discovered footprints in the Cotton Hollow area right where the giant had appeared to them. Each one measured 18.5 inches long and 5.5 inches across with a 5-inch heel. Not only that, but the men also asked people living in the area if they had ever heard of anything like what they had seen the night before. A few of the locals confirmed that they too had seen something gigantic roaming around the woods at night. Some of the folks put his height at 9 feet and his weight at least 500 pounds. What was seen on the outskirts of Naugatuck? It kind of sounds like a Bigfoot, but while not unheard of, you don't usually hear about Bigfoot speaking to eyewitnesses. Could the Cotton Hollow giant have been one of the last giants to ever roam the earth? Well, it seems as though if they ever existed at all, giants long since died out in America. But if you look elsewhere in the world, that seems to not be the case. In fact, residents of the one archipelago in the southern hemisphere say that they live alongside giants to this very day. Just to the northeast of Australia sit the Solomon Islands, a country composed of 21 large separate islands scattered throughout the Pacific. It was here that, at age of 35, Australian citizen Marius Borayo set out to start a new life. Marius soon discovered that the Solomons were a unique place. Here, strange things didn't just happen, they were actually a normal part of life. Among the many things that Marius encountered during his time in the Solomon Islands were mysterious ruins, UFOs, and of course, persistent reports of giants inhabiting the deepest depths of the forests. Marius discusses many of these encounters, both his own and those of his new countrymen, in his 2010 book, Solomon Islands Mysteries. And while it's full of a lot of fascinating information, some of the most interesting accounts involve a race of enormous beings dwelling throughout the archipelago, beings that he specifically refers to as people. Marius says that many residents of the island of Guadalcanal believe wholeheartedly in the existence of these beings, and he says that they not only live in the rainforest, but also make extensive use of a vast system of tunnels snaking below the surface of the island. In fact, according to many locals, even they can use these tunnels, traveling the entire length of the island from east to west without ever emerging. Here, somewhere in the hidden depths, sit an entire city of giants, hundreds, if not thousands of them. From the people on Guadalcanal, Marius learned that these giants are actually several species, the tallest of which, like the giants seen by the Conquistadors, stand over 10 feet tall. Most of them sound like Bigfoot. They are covered in long brown, black, or reddish hair, they have flat noses, large mouths, and smell disgusting. Marius tells one story about how a gold mining operation bordering the giants' territory was established in 1998. The mine required a ton of new, heavy earth-moving equipment to clear the area, including massive industrial bulldozers that leveled the forest. Marius wrote this:
On one occasion, one of these huge bulldozers broke down, with one of the pins on the blade attachment rendered useless. As it was late in the afternoon, they decided to drop the blade there and take the bulldozer back to the workshop to do the repairs overnight to continue on the next day. When they returned the next morning, the blade had disappeared. All the men became confused. How could such a heavy object simply disappear? Mind you, we're talking about 10 tons plus. So they started scouting around in the nearby bush and happened to notice giant footprints 3 to 4 feet in length, close to where the blade had been left. Finally, some 100-odd meters away on a small nearby hill, one of the men called out, "Here it is." From further footprint investigation, they deduced that the giants had not carried it there, but had thrown it, or had got there some other way.
Apparently, officials knew that they were encroaching on the giants' territory. Marius also shared a personal story learned while working as a helicopter pilot. During this time, his office was across the way from the Guadalcanal provincial headquarters, and Marius became good friends with the staff there. In fact, he would often have a few beers with a man named Victor, who was the finance minister and the Guadalcanal premier himself. Marius emphasizes that these are individuals of impeccable character. Victor remained a Guadalcanal minister, and the premier went on to become a national minister. According to Marius, both the premier and the Victor went out one day to survey the area of the proposed gold mine. It's the middle of the afternoon, and they aren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. In fact, their only concern is that they can make it to the site without getting stuck in the mud. You see, it's hot and humid because it rains so much this time of the year, but they feel pretty confident. Their truck is a twin-cab Toyota Helix, so they start making their way up the mountainside. At first, everything seems normal, but the drive feels like it's taking forever. They snake back and forth along the muddy road, speeding up whenever they see a slippery patch up ahead, passing in and out of towns and villages along the way. Now finally, Victor and the premier make it just down the road from the proposed gold mine. But here, the road is even sketchier, meaning that just a few weeks ago, there hadn't even been a road here. No, it's been recently carved out by a bulldozer, and it's nothing but mud. Well, they finally get a dose of the bad luck they've been worried about. The truck comes around a curve a little too fast, and before they know it, they've slipped off the road. It's not the end of the world. It's not like they've fallen down a ravine or anything, but they know they're going to have a hard time getting the truck back on the road. After hopping out and trying to push, both Victor and the premier realize that they can't do anything. They'll have to head back down the road in the direction of one of the villages that they passed through to get help, and so they set back on down the road. Luckily, there are plenty of people there to help them. Victor and the premier enlist about 30 men, and they all head back. As they round the corner where the truck got stuck, they all stop. No one can believe their eyes. The truck is back on the road, and standing at either end, one by the hood and one by the bed, are two giants. Judging from how they tower over the cab of the truck, each one stands at least 15 feet high. Needless to say, everyone involved in the rescue attempt turns around and heads back down the mountain in the direction of town as fast as their feet can carry them. They slip and slide down into the village, where they remain in safety for around half an hour before making the trek back to the truck. What they found confirmed what they had all seen. There, exactly where the two giants had stood, were sets of footprints, each one measured between 3 and 4 feet long, depending on how much the mud had distorted the tracks. Apparently, the giants had taken it upon themselves to haul the truck back onto the road, although no one knows exactly why. The footprints seem to tell the story plainly enough. Each giant had kept one foot on the road, the other near the vehicle, and simply moved it back into place. Needless to say, Marius wouldn't have believed the story if he hadn't heard the same thing over and over again. But during his time in the Solomon Islands, he has come to meet numerous eyewitnesses who all share consistent stories. One of those witnesses was a teenager named Rex. Marius personally knew Rex and his parents. According to Marius, Rex was 16 in 1998. He went to spend 6 months with his cousins in Rere, a village on the northeastern coast of Guadalcanal. While there, he and 3 other boys would do this sort of things others young men might. They explored the surrounding jungle, fished, and hunted pigs. With these adventures, however, came one rule. Their parents absolutely forbade them from venturing on the other side of one particular river. There, about 6 miles inland in the mountains, dwelled a giant. Not only that, but an especially notorious giant known for being aggressive. Well, you know how the story goes. 4 young men are bound to push the limits. One morning, they pushed those limits a little too far and got more than they bargained for. Rex and his cousin set out, slingshots in hand, as if that's going to do anything, to do a little fishing and exploring. And this adventure naturally took them straight into the Forbidden Zone. But whatever reservations they had at first were quickly forgotten after they successfully caught some fish and harvested some freshwater snails. In fact, they soon became so engrossed in snail catching that they completely forgot about what their parents had told them. They knew that no one at home would care that they returned with bushels of snails, which, when cooked over an open fire, were actually delicious. After a while, one of Rex's cousins who had left the group came running back. He was excited because he had just discovered something out of the ordinary, an entire orchard overflowing with ripe fruit that was ready to be picked. I bet you guys can guess where this is at. Rex and the others followed him back to the orchard and soon knew that something was wrong. For starters, the orchard looked like it was managed. Everything was arranged in tidy rows, and none of the fruit showed any signs of being eaten. What's more, Rex was familiar with all the fruit that grew on Guadalcanal, and he couldn't recognize any of it. That's when he remembered the story of the giant. Something about it tending an orchard. Was this? No, it couldn't be. If Rex even seriously entertained the idea at all, it disappeared the moment his cousins came rushing in. They were now playing, acting like they were warriors. But as they roamed throughout the orchard, shooting their slingshots and causing a racket, reality slowly crept back in. Because shortly after they started playing, they soon stumbled upon what looked like a partly abandoned trail. Obviously, they had to follow it, but only Rex and his oldest cousin. The two younger ones stayed back. The deeper they went into the jungle, however, the stranger things became. Because mere moments after setting down the path, they came upon something neither Rex nor his cousin had ever seen before. It was a hut, made from gigantic leaves all woven together, standing all alone in the forest. And it was absolutely immense, big enough for a giant. It was somewhat circular in construction, and the weirdest thing was, it was clear that this hut was inhabited, because from a small hole in the roof, a thin wisp of smoke was pouring out into the sky. Rex looked over at his cousin. Could there really be a giant hiding out in this orchard? They always thought that the adults were just trying to keep them from wandering off, but now, looking at the mysterious hut in the equally mysterious orchard, they couldn't help but wonder. By now, any idea that they might be in danger had long since vanished. Rex and his cousin were way more curious to see the giant than they were afraid, hiding as best they could in the trees. The two of them sat there, waiting for some other sign of life from the hut. Maybe the giant would peek its head out, or grunt or something, but nothing happened. For over an hour, the hut showed no other signs of life other than the fire that crackled inside. Finally, after growing way too impatient for his own good, the cousin who had come with Rex decided that he had had enough. When he retold Rex's story, Marius wrote this.
Rex's cousin decided to creep up to the hut and have a quick peek inside. He quietly approached the hut, slowly moving to the entrance and, with one eye, quickly looked inside. There he saw a huge 15-foot long-haired giant squatting near a small fire. The unfortunate part of it was that the giant also saw him. When the two other boys saw him frantically running back towards them and the giant coming out of his hut, they nearly froze in fright. From the way they tell it, at least. But they too started to run back through the jungle in the direction they had come. Little did they know the giant was right behind them.
According to what Rex told Marius, he and his cousin ran back as fast as possible to the orchard, stumbling ahead of the shaggy beast hot on their heels. When they reached their two younger cousins, they stopped unloading as much detail as they could. The other boys were confused, since Rex and his cousin were constantly jabbering over each other. That was when it happened. Everyone fell silent as the jungle exploded. From the dense leaves, an enormous shaggy form rushed forward and with just a handful of steps overcame the four boys. Between how quickly it happened and how terrified they were, they never stood a chance. It reached out an enormous hairy paw and wrapped it around the cousin that had peeked into the hut. It all unfolded in a blur. The hand reached around the cousin's midsection, it grabbed tight, muscles ripped in the arm and lifted the cousin off his feet and into the air. In the meantime, the 3 remaining cousins had started heading out of the orchard as quickly as their feet would carry them. Marius wrote this.
After fearfully looking over their shoulders some 30-odd meters away, Rex and his companions stopped to see that the giant was just standing there looking at them, with his screaming cousin squirming while tucked away under the giant's arm. During those few moments, somehow, more than likely due to the giant's conscious decision, Rex's cousin wriggled himself loose and fell to the ground in front of the giant's feet. The giant made no effort to recapture him and allowed him to get to his feet and run away with the rest of the lads.
And that was that. Rex and his cousins never stopped running until they reached home. They were lucky to escape with their lives. All 4 of them made a pact that very night. If they ever went out again, they would never, ever cross the river and into the giant's territory. So let me ask all of you who've made it this far into the episode, is there truth to giants not only once existing, but still currently existing in the unknown reaches of our planet? And because you guys have made it this far, I want you to all leave a comment below, fee, fi, fo, fum, so I know which ones of you made it to the end and who didn't. And I'd appreciate it if you'd slap that like button down below and leave a like so I can keep bringing more of these awesome stories. And never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode.